T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Kush'S Korner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. We got a good one tonight. One of my most anticipated episodes yet. I have on Shane Adamson and Blake Bauer to discuss breeding Halmahera scrub pythons and really everything related to Halmahera scrub pythons. But as many of you already probably know, these guys are two of the only people in the world to successfully breed the species. So it's been a long time I've anticipated getting these guys on the show, so I'm glad to be able to. But before we get into it, as always, USARC. For anyone who is unaware out there, USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to pursue this means of life. Check out usarc.org for all of the relevant information about the organization. If you are not already a member, please look into becoming a member of USARC. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people we have behind the cause, the better. And we are brought to you tonight by Mark Bailey Reptiles. Mark Bailey is an OG of the reptile industry, has been one of the front runners in the ball python part of the industry for many, many years now. So if you are a ball python person, please check out Mark Bailey Reptiles for some of the highest end ball pythons on the market right now. We're also brought to you by Juggernaut Reptiles. They are one of the front runners in the blood and short-tail python game, as well as ball pythons, anacondas, and a variety of other species they're working with. If any of those are species of interest to you, please check out Juggernaut Reptiles. And we're also brought to you by Blake's Exotic Feeders. For anyone here in the United States who is looking for quail to feed to their reptiles, check out Blake's Exotic Feeders. They hand raise everything in their facility here in the U.S., so you know you're getting a good product from a quality U.S.-based source. Again, check out Blake's Exotic Feeders. All right, here we are. This is one that I definitely don't want to waste a whole bunch of time up front on because I want to get right into it. So without further ado, let's bring these guys on. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
I'm pretty good. I'm excited to get into the conversation here. So not often that you can speak to one person who has bred Halmahera scrubs, nonetheless, two people at the same time. So this is a pretty damn cool experience. Again, thank you guys for your time tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. So this is the first time I've done a two guest show on here, so it'll be a little bit of balancing this and figuring out how to kind of make everything flow. But I guess Blake, I'll start with you. How did you get into scrub pythons and Halmaheras, and kind of what was your journey up to the point of being able to attempt breeding them?
Yeah, it kind of began in college. Started amassing, a bunch of different snakes, and eventually kind of narrowed it down to pythons. And I had a good friend and mentor who was a grad student named Robert Weaver, and he didn't keep snakes at that point, but he used to keep a bunch of scrubs and stuff. And so he always told me about them. And then I became friends with, I was in Central Washington University, so near Nick Mutton, Ryan Young, Yasser Mustafa. And so started hanging out with them at shows and stuff. And of course, they're pretty good at getting you hooked on that kind of stuff. So,
I bet.
And then, just started keeping as many scrubs as I can, and eventually had the opportunity to work with Halmaheras. And I worked with most of the rest before that. And so naturally I wanted to try all of them, and eventually really fell in love with them once I started working with them.
What was it about them that did it for you compared to the other scrub species?
It's kind of when you start keeping them, and they typically are very shy and kind of more reclusive. But then once they're settled in and they kind of go through a whole shift of personality where they start acting more like the other scrubs. Once I kind of went through that, that kind of hooked me. I was like, man, that was cool to see that transition in them. And I just love the way they look. They're super pretty. You know, they're not the flashiest of the scrubs, but I love it. I'm not always the one about the flashiest kinds, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, because I mean, some of these, especially some of these animals that Shane has posted recently, like high yellow, gold looking animals. I mean, a high yellow, high like orange Halmahera, I think you can put that up with any Barneck or Clasto in my personal opinion.
Oh yeah, I shared a picture several months ago of the female we have at the zoo, and she is, in my opinion, one of the best I've ever seen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well then, Shane, I'll kick that question over to you. How did your scrub journey get you to Halmaheras?
Well, back in the 90s, not to show my age, but back in the 90s, I had Barnecks and the Clastos and stuff like that. But I also had a lot of other different things. The first python that I bred on my own when I wasn't working at the zoo was a white-lipped python. And I kind of moved into a lot of different, into the Brettles, Roughies, stuff like that over the last 20 years or so. And I think it was back in about 2013 or 2014, there was a guy in Canada that he had gotten a few, I think, infertile eggs or had some reproduction. It was back in the Morelia Python forum. We're always on there and everything. And the Halmahera has always struck me as kind of this prehistoric or, dark jungle type mystical looking scrub. There's just something more about them like that about them than all the others. So yeah. And I think Yasser said something on a forum post or on a Facebook post that said, y'all can forget about breeding Halmahera pythons. And I think that was like 2014 or 2015. And I was like, well, we're going to give it a shot. So
that was all you needed. You just needed that little bit of a challenge. And then you're like,
what? Don't tell me I can't.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess I'll back over to you, Blake. So you, as many people probably know, you produced them at the Oklahoma City Zoo. Mm-hmm. What was first of all, how did you get involved in the zoo? What brought you to the point of being able to have that opportunity?
Yeah. Zoos, at least my zoo, has always been pretty good about trying to get us stuff that we're interested in. And so originally, so Curious said I could get something, pick out something or whatever. And was originally going to get some Timor pythons from San Diego Zoo. Okay. That was kind of in the process. And then the Bronx Zoo came out and said, hey, we have these amethystine pythons. If anybody wants them. And I was like, well, what kind are they? And they said, oh, they're the Halmahera subspecies or something like that. And I said, oh, well, I want those instead. I had to choose one or the other. And I'm pretty sure I made the right choice. So
yeah. How long had you been at the zoo by the time you had the opportunity to get those snakes?
Probably about 2 years at that point.
Okay. Had you started as like a low-level keeper and worked your way up, or did you come in at a higher level position?
Just started as a regular keeper. I was straight out of college.
Okay. So you were up in the Pacific Northwest for college and then out to OKC afterward. Did you move there for the zoo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never been to Oklahoma before I moved here for this job. So.
Okay. How does it compare to Washington?
Completely opposite.
Which do you prefer?
Yeah. So I like both. So my family's made a pretty good life here, so I can't complain about Oklahoma too much.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, the allure with these snakes for the longest time was always that they were the only python species to never be produced in captivity. What do you guys think was the cause of that? I mean, had it just been a lack of attempting or limited imports, or I guess Blake, I'll start back with you. What were your thoughts on that, historically speaking?
Yeah, but I started keeping them late 2000s, somewhere in there. And at that time, there weren't a ton being imported, and not a lot of people having success with just keeping them alive for a time. And so there had been a lot of talk about just how do we keep these things alive, and people start talking about keeping them warmer, more humid, things like that. And so I think just in the beginning, nobody was even getting to the point of trying to breed them.
Okay.
So, a couple of years later.
Yeah.
So, and I think that may have to do with maybe, I mean, I don't really know kind of what they go through from, being imported from Halmahera. My guess is back then it was a pretty rough journey, and I think they came in pretty rough shape. And I think part of just why more people are having success is we're getting them imported in better conditions. So,
Sure.
And I think a lot more of the imports were larger and not, really small ones like we can get now. So,
exactly.
A bunch of factors.
Shane, do you have anything to add on the historic difficulty of breeding?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like Blake said before. You keep these animals that are freshly imported, and they're very secretive and very timid, and they go through this change. So I think the bottom line is time. Like I said, the female, OG female that I had that recently passed away, she was the second female that I had, and I had her for 9 years. So I think she had her for 7 years when she laid the first clutch. So I think it's a matter of time. And I think I've heard that people say this before, that you'll get these snakes and nothing happens in the first couple of years. People want to recoup, money or whatever, which when I first got mine in 2014, I think I paid for the first 4, I paid less than $1,000 for the first 4 adult imports. Now they're considerably more, but I think I don't think people gave them the right amount of time. And that, it's fine. It gave me an opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, at least I haven't been able to breed them yet, but just keeping them at a certain point, and kind of like to what Blake was saying earlier, they have that initial stage where they kind of like have that glazed over, half dead look, and then they become a scrub python, like all of a sudden. But from that point on, they seem like just about any other python, with about an 80% accuracy in there. They're obviously very unique on their own. So to me, it was always a little bit confusing, at least from not having the kind of longer term perspective that you guys had as to, what didn't work out with them. But Blake, back to the animals that you worked with at the zoo, or still do. Obviously they were wild caught, but how long had the Bronx had them? How big were they by the time they made it over to you? All that good stuff.
If I remember correctly, I think they were imported in like 2004 and were basically sub-adults already. And so when I got them, they were probably all 7 to 8 feet-ish. Well, they were decent size by the time I got them. So.
Okay. All right. Not bad. So from the time you got them to when you felt like you were ready to get them into breeding, like how long was that roughly?
Within a year or two, they would breed. Not like, breeding constantly. It was mostly like thunderstorms came through, you would find them breeding, things like that. It was probably like 5 years before they really started breeding. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah. Other than, just a copulation here and there. And then it was like 5 years that the female started acting like she was trying to build follicles and things like that.
What was your thought process behind why it took her so long?
I think it's just they need to be comfortable. It takes them a while to really get comfortable. Even, they might seem like fairly comfortable, used to the surroundings in a year or two, but it may take years before they're truly comfortable. And then just kind of getting on their cycle, getting to know them. I think part of all of that was just I got to know the female and her cycle and when to do certain things like increasing her feed, upping humidity, things like that.
Okay. Got it. Were they on display for breeding, or were they off display?
They did everything on display up until laying eggs. I pulled her off for that, but yeah, up until then, everything was on display. You could go by and see Halmaharas breeding. And when they did, it was usually like I would get in there first thing in the morning, and they would be breeding the entire 8 hours that I was there at the day.
Huh? Really?
Yeah.
So do you think that period of time had to do with partially with them being so exposed to people walking by in that display type setting?
It could very well have contributed to that. It wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Did you have troubles with like any sort of temperature, humidity cycling you try to do with them based on, or even light cycle based on the fact that they were in a display hall at a zoo?
Not really. They were in pretty big exhibit. So it's like 4 feet by 4 feet by like 6 feet tall.
Okay.
I climbed in there to clean and everything. And so I had, pretty heavy lights up top so they can get up and bask, but they had a pretty good gradient where it was like 75 down on the floor, but it could be, 95 under the basking spot.
Okay.
And I actually had, during the period that I was doing all the breeding and everything with them, I had running water through their exhibit. And usually at least once a week, I would take and just hose down the exhibit because it had a drain and everything.
Okay. Interesting. What do you think that like added to them, considering that's like something that most of us just private keepers aren't probably, not that we're not capable of doing it, but it's a lot of work for a private setting.
Yeah. And it's harder in, small, plastic boxes like this. You can't really hose them down. It may not dry or drain, and, it could be too wet for them. So,
sure.
Yeah, I think that really kind of helped in that regard. Most people that keep Halmaharas, usually if you missed them, they will drink. So the fact that I was able to take like a hose to them, basically, with like the shower setting, they would drink every single time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like that's probably something that a lot of us private people overlook. Just kind of comparing situations. When I was talking with Dennis McNamara, he said the same thing about when he bred Amazon basins at the Virginia Zoo 4 years in a row of, frequently just sitting there with the mister and just letting him drink as long as they want because they have all the proper drainage systems in place to be able to do that. I feel like that's something that the private sector will do for a lot of lizard species, but not quite so much for snakes. Do you kind of use some of those strategies at home with your collection?
Yeah, I do when I can. I'll bring, at least during the summer, not so much during the winter, I'll bring the hose in here and hose everybody down. Can't do it as much as,
Sure.
if I had to drain and stuff, but yeah.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So before we get into the breeding, I'm going to throw it back over to you, Shane, kind of same thing. When did you start getting the Halmaharas, and kind of when did you first acquire your breeders?
Yeah, so in 2014, I got my first 2 males. And then sometime in 2015, I got 2 females. It was about the same time that I met Blake at the zoo, traveling through Oklahoma one time, and just stopped in and saw him because I knew they had Halmaharas there.
Okay.
Yeah, so I got the first 4 2.2 back then, and didn't add anything else until 2019, right before I was diagnosed with cancer. I had gotten another female because I felt like I just, wanted some more to try and add to the group. one of the males died from a burn from a because I didn't have the proper what do you call it, the light or heat emitter. Didn't have a cage around it, and he crawled up around it because I thought, man, he's not going to do it. Have him on everything now because even with vet care we couldn't save him. But so eventually I basically started with those 5 in 5 years. I did see, like Blake said, I did see copulations from some of the first pairings in 2016 or 17 from 2 separate animals that actually ended up having eggs in 2020 or 2021. But again, never got any, no ovulation. It was just random copulations. In 2020, when I kind of came up with this little system of transfer where the snakes can go between cages, I just let the male and female that I had left kind of come together, and they would breed off and on for, like Blake said, days at a time. So that was kind of what I started with, was just kind of 5 adult animals, which like I said, of the 5, I have 1 female left. So
yeah, that does. I mean, it seems like with those bigger wild caughts, the attrition rate historically has been pretty high. I've run into issues with ones I've had over time where just, you get them in, they might eat once or twice. They still seem to kind of be in that wild state, and they don't fully transition over.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think, and I hate to say it because I know everybody wants to get on here and hear us say this is how you do it, but I honestly feel like the biggest part is that getting over that hump is luck of getting that animal to that second stage of captivity or life.
Sure. So Shane, what was the strategy that you used for establishing those fresh wild caught animals?
Really, really hands off. I kept them in large, like Christmas tree tubs during quarantine. And then I built these large melamine cages behind me. And even then kept them separate from everything else in, super quiet. I did do like fecal exams. I think one of them some of them were fairly clean. The other ones ended up having like some type of pinworm. We just use fenbenzidol or whatever to treat them. Nothing honestly too spectacular once they started eating pretty solid. I would try and do a lot of hands-off cleaning. So I use like a little Rubbermaid 5-gallon tub for a hide. And if they were in there, I took that opportunity to just take the whole tub and the snake out, clean them, put them back in. I never had to touch them. That's kind of what I try and do now. If things get, like I said, most of the animals that I have now, I can easily pick them up and move them out. And it doesn't affect that they're feeding, or it doesn't stress them as much, so. But definitely when those new wild, fresh imports, they just need to be left alone.
How long or so would you say that period was of full, like to where you were confident that they were well enough acclimated to where you don't have to quite worry about them so much anymore?
Like Blake said, I think, and it's probably me being overly cautious, but at least a year and a half before I was like, pretty comfortable. Sure. I hated to do anything hands-on with them, unless it was absolutely medically necessary for sure. So, yeah. And that's probably, like I said, just me being overly cautious. I know one individual that has had some luck with getting eggs, that the female that he got eggs from was fairly young, or had recently been imported within, I think, a year and a half to 2 years. So,
wow. That's very quick. At least a couple years earlier than I would have assumed that one would even try it.
Oh yeah. I agree. Me too. But again, that was my, my take or my view on it was, leave them alone. And now he probably did the same thing. I'm sure he probably left them alone too.
Sure.
But yeah, it was impressive. Yeah, it's good.
What was it like getting those fresh wild caught started on food?
Honestly, the first 4 that I got, I didn't have any real issues. The OG female, when she came in, she was about the same size as these 3-year-olds over here, but she was pencil thin. I drop fed all of them. I would just put the rat in and they would eat it. The 5th female, the female that gave me eggs last year, she didn't eat on her own for 2 years. So it's a last ditch effort. Started to, I did a couple assist feedings. And one time I was thawing some chicks for some other snakes relatively close to her cage. And I came in and she was just pinning her nose in the corner of the cage as close to those chicks as she could get. So I opened it up and threw one in, and she been solid ever since. And
wow.
Yeah. So I feel pretty fortunate now. There are times that even with the well-established animals that I have, that they'll just stop eating completely. Naturally, males, once the females start to, put off signs, the males just will stop eating. But those initial wild imports, and again, it's just leave them alone. The drop feeding, I've tried live and it just never works with Halmaheras. The rodent is too, moves too much, freaks them out too much.
Yeah.
In my opinion, or my case. So
yeah, I would agree with that on a couple of experiences I've had with some difficult imports that the live did not do the trick. It was always just some sort of rotation of random feeder items until it ended up working out. How big was that female that you ended up having to assist feed?
At the time, she was only about 6 or so feet long. She's as big now as the male that I got from you.
Okay.
Eggs with. So she's right here behind me. She's probably 8 feet now, maybe.
Yeah.
At least.
Assist feeding a 6-foot Halmahera had to be a fun experience, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, she was so weak at that point that it wasn't even that challenging, though.
No, they still have this incredible, no matter how, if they're ill or whatever, they have this incredible ability to squeeze, for as narrow or as slender as a snake as they are, they can really tighten down. So yeah, it's never an easy task to assist feed anything. So yeah, avoid it never at all costs. But I didn't want to, I wanted to give her every opportunity, and I'm glad I did, because she turned out to lay 6 good eggs. So
yeah, that's crazy that a snake that was in such rough shape could turn the corner to the point of actually laying viable eggs. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, and considering she just took her first meals on her own in 2021 and then turned around and laid eggs in 2023.
So you had her since 2019?
I got her in March of 2019.
Okay. Wow. That's insane. That's that's a testament to the what these snakes can actually do, that a snake that looks to the point of being, past the point of no return can fully bounce back to the point of giving you a clutch.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I got to do a very unprofessional podcaster thing and run for like 30 seconds, but I'll be right back.
All right, so I guess it's just us. Left us no instructions.
Got any good jokes?
I usually do bad jokes, terrible jokes. Yes. See the comments if anybody has any questions. We can try that.
Yeah, I was gonna try and log in here to the comments and see.
Okay. Not happy I had to do that. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
So
Blake was telling dirty jokes.
good. The dead air was filled by something fun. Do you have anything to add to what Shane was saying about the establishing process?
Yeah, basically that's kind of experiences I've had and then basically most of the ones that, when I first get them in, it was, you go in late at night after all the lights are out. I would just open a bin or whatever, toss a mouse or rat in and leave. And then I would have to leave for basically the rest of the night. There were too many times where I'd go back in and it'd have it halfway down and just spit it out. And then we'll take the rest of the night. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I couldn't stress more like what he said. If you're getting these things in, leave it alone for quite a while. Eventually they meet you at the front of the bin when you have the mouse or rat or whatever, and
sure,
that's when they're kind of settling in.
Yeah. How would you guys compare that process to any of the other scrub pythons that you've established?
Yeah, like all the other scrubs that I've gotten in, even fresh wild caught ones, I can't remember any that wouldn't take even a frozen thawed rat off of tongs first try, or live if that didn't work. Yeah, these guys, like, you have to be really careful, and they would just drop it in and leave, and then eventually it would find it throughout the night.
Yeah. Shane, how about you?
Yeah, the barnecks and the class of lepus that I had back in the 90s, it's same. The barnecks, they crushed anything, whether they were pissed off because I was there or because they were actually hungry. They still took it. I don't remember the clastos having a lot of difficulty. But yeah, the hounds, well, and like I said, the first 4 that I got, I didn't have that much difficulty getting them started. Like I said, just left them alone. The barnecks and others that I had before, never had an issue with. I haven't had many, but never had much of an issue. I also haven't. I'm trying to think how many wild snakes I've ever, gotten. I think the white lips back in the 90s were some of the only other ones that I've gotten that have been imported.
Okay. Have either of you guys ever had Bauer scrubs?
No,
yeah, I have a son of Satan one here now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I asked because they are they're as close to Halmaheras as I've experienced with establishing, and actually I would even say worse. I've had terrible luck with Bauers, not feeding or not feeding consistently. They don't quite have that like comatose phase, but definitely a phase where they seem wild quite a bit longer. Like they don't get that kind of physicality that these kind of longer term captive animals have right away. So I've always just been curious about, the similarities that I've drawn between them. But anyway, so Blake, had you had experience with Halmaheras before the animals that came to the zoo?
Yeah, I had some before I got those ones in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
just a small group.
Okay. Had you gotten them to the point of even thinking about attempting breeding that smaller group yet?
Yeah, I had gotten, copulation and stuff out of them, but
okay.
that was about it.
Okay. So you had a pretty solid idea of how you wanted to approach your project at the zoo then?
Yeah. And I had, probably at that time when we got these, I had probably 20 or 30 other scrubs.
Okay. Okay. Had you bred other species of scrubs by then? I assume probably, right?
No, I hadn't.
Oh, so Halmaheras were the first scrubs that you bred?
Those were my first ones. I came close with Waminas. I think it was in like 2015 where they bred and everything, and then she got egg bound. And I got them out, but none of the eggs hatched. And then, unfortunately, she passed away right after that. So,
Yeah, I'd like to say that I haven't been there, but I certainly have been. So when you had the opportunity at the zoo to get those animals in, what was the strategy that you had in your head going into that of, okay, this is how old these animals are, this is what I'm going to do with them to get them established, and then this is what I'm going to do for my breeding program?
And yeah, I mean, just, you know, again, leaving them alone. We put them, a few of them on display fairly quickly, like once they cleared quarantine and everything, and they seemed to be doing okay. And eventually, like, they were in a smaller exhibit, and then I eventually, like, looking at our larger ones, and I picked out the one I was like, you know what, I really like this one. It's large. They have room to use the full exhibit, and it was kind of in a room connected to our greenhouse, so it had a little bit more of a temperature swing throughout the seasons.
Okay.
So it got a little hotter during the summer and cooler during the winter. So it kind of had a little bit more of a natural shift like that. And then I played around with, you know, multiple males, and never actually saw any sort of combat between them. And I could have them in there for periods of time. The one time came in one morning, one of the males had a big gash in him. And so I kind of stopped playing with multiple males after that. No idea if that was, you know, fighting or anything. It could have been a random food aggression thing. It might have been the female that bit him. I'm not sure. So, but I've never seen them combat. So, but
Okay.
if you wanted to try it, I would suggest just being cautious, just in case, because you never know what can happen.
I've accidentally done both, 2 males and 2 females, that I later realized was what I had done. One actually was Shane's male that when I sent him was sold to me as a female, and he never got aggressive with the other male that he ended up being housed with for a little while. But they didn't breed. I realized why a little bit later on. So how many animals did come in that original group?
We got in 4. There were
Okay.
2.2.
Okay.
We lost one female at some point. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened with her, but so then we ended up with the main group was 2.1.
Okay. All right. So you'd have those 2 males in simultaneously with the female?
Yeah. And really, one of the males was a much better breeder than the female. So he was the one that ended up being in there most of the time. And after I decided it's not worth having 2 males in there, he was in it most of the time. He was also the one out of the 3 of them that was pretty aggressive. So apparently that made him a good breeder as well. The other male's pretty calm, but like rarely bred. So
Interesting.
The first male.
What behaviors did you see when you had all 3 in the enclosure at the same time?
I mean, they would all utilize different spots of the exhibit. And I think I've even seen the males curled up together at times. Nothing too out of the ordinary.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah, because on the kind of this similar kind of Somalia theme, that's been in the last couple of years, the main talk with the Boelens breeding has been importance of using multiple males, for whatever it's worth, which would kind of, you think would make sense that scrub pythons may sometimes exhibit similar types of behaviors, just considering how similar they are. I've never personally tried it, and I don't know if I will, but it's interesting to have. Didn't Chuck also do something similar in his setup?
I believe, he had 2.1, if I remember correctly, and like he had a caging system that they can go like from one to the other and kind of spend time together if they want it or not. Yeah.
Okay. So in the years that led up to your eventual success, were there things that you tweaked from year over year that you saw as kind of what you needed to put in place in order to get a successful clutch?
I don't know if I really changed a lot, because I kept saying, okay, I'm getting close, and just kind of yeah, probably some fine tuning. But it was just, I got really in tune with the female of just knowing what stage she's at and when she's doing what, you know, and I knew, like, especially whenever she was really building follicles, anytime you open the door, she came flying at you wanting something to eat. And so I just would kind of up her food at that point, and that would usually lead to ovulation.
What time of year was that when you were seeing the increased feeding response?
So with mine, actually, they bred different times of the year every time.
Really? Okay.
You know, I got eggs from them a couple times and was only able to successfully hatch them that one time. But each time it was, completely different time. And it was the only time I didn't really see any breeding from them is like dead middle of the summer.
Sure.
But I know there's one time where I waited until like, I think it was September. And, you know, it was basically summer temperatures up until there was a certain day that like a bunch of storms came through and temperatures dropped like 20 degrees after that. And so I was like, okay, I know I'm going to feed them a big meal and throw them together right before that. And sure enough, they just started breeding. And I think the next time it was like I threw them together in the middle of winter. And there was another time I threw them together in the spring, and they would breed each of those times.
Okay. So what time of year, what was your first clutch? When did that hit the ground?
Oh, I couldn't say for sure. It's that first one was probably almost 10 years ago at this point. To remember exactly when
so the first one was the unsuccessful clutch.
Yeah, I had.
Got it.
First time she laid eggs, they ended up being fully shelled and fertile. And then second time, there were 3 that went the entire distance. And then for whatever reason, when they're hatching, they didn't absorb a lot of their yolk and were real weak and died. Then after that was when I was able to hatch them all. Well,
okay.
5 out of the 6. One of the egg went bad.
Okay. So that was the 2019 clutch?
2018.
2018. Okay.
Yeah. So that one was, I think it hatched in November of 2018.
October.
So
Yeah.
probably July eggs.
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds right.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely curious. It seems like, I mean, at least this year alone, I think scrub eggs have hit the ground every month between January and July, throughout the country. So it's just super interesting to me that so many of that, like, there's such a wide range, obviously all having to do with you know, how individuals keep and cycle their rooms. But, you know, with a lot of other, like with tree boas, for instance, it seems that you're getting litters in the late summer, early fall, and that's kind of it, no matter how you do it. What are your thoughts on how scrubs breed as far as that goes?
Yeah. You know, I always knew, like, with them, thunderstorms passing through was always a good way to get them, kind of jumpstart them. Because that's when I noticed, you know, early on when they had only been in here like a year or so, they'd breed when thunderstorms came through, and that was all I'd see it. And so, yeah, I just kind of, I guess I kind of let it a bit with, you know, when I put them together, I'd increase their food. The rest of the year, it would be much more sporadic, like every 4 to 6 weeks or so. And then I throw them together, and I might feed them every 2 weeks, but, you know, could be smaller meals. And then as she's progressing through, I can tell she was getting towards ovulation, it might be like a small rat every week, just to kind of, like, I don't know, kind of getting her to believe, okay, things are good. Like, there's lots of food around and things like that. Now's a good time to, you know, produce eggs, that kind of thing.
So did you ever put your animals through any sort of extended fasting periods?
Not really. Yeah, I don't think I ever did like months at a time where I didn't feed them. It would just be, maybe 6 weeks at most. And I'd give them a meal and then nothing for another 4 to 6 weeks or so.
Okay.
Not really extended though.
Okay. Interesting. Want to throw Lisa's comment up, and I guess both of you guys can answer this, but yeah, behaviors in the females that, like you were saying, that increased feeding response. Were there any other behaviors that you guys were looking for that signified the beginning of their follicular development?
Yeah, she would spend more time up on top under the basking lights. Just looked very full, and just, she's a really light colored animal, and she would, do the whole like turning dark, and she would just get darker and darker. And when I'd see that, she just looked very full towards the end. And yeah, just I had to be very careful going in there during that time, because she would fly out at me, and was more worried about if I would go in there and she was right next to the male, there was a chance she bit the male. So I would usually have to look and see where the male is, make sure he was kind of on the opposite side before I opened that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Shane?
Something I saw with both my females in, I was just looking at my notes here when I'd kind of jot things down. The females would, like Blake said, would get really dark. One of them, so I call her the pewter female because she's really gray. She doesn't have much yellow or green to her. She kind of worried me because she actually stopped eating in, I think, December-ish. And then, but she turned really dark. But one of the main things that I knew where things were going in the right direction was because they would both plaster themselves to the colder side of the cage until we started seeing breeding activity. And then once we started seeing breeding activity, they would be hitting the warm side of the cage. So I don't know if we want to get into like what preparations I made, but when I first, and I just did this on a whim. It wasn't, go ahead. What?
Oh, sorry. I was to say we could finally hit Brian's question that's been sitting there for a second, but yeah, let's get into it. If you guys, let's talk all about the cycling.
So what I usually do as far as feeding, I kind of slow down everybody's feeding in the entire room through the summer. And then I think I talked about this before on another podcast or something, where you kind of look at the snake and go, crap, I want to breed that thing this fall, so I'm going to increase feeding. So in the fall, I up the feeding a little bit more to the females, where instead of like in the summer, I might have fed them 1 time or 2 times during the summer. And then we start hitting September, October, and I'll start, bumping it up to maybe every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then also around Thanksgiving, that's when I turn on the humidifier. So, right now it's about 60% humidity in here and averages about 80 degrees throughout most of the day. And then when I turn the humidifiers on, I get it up to about 75 or 80% humidity. I can't tell you if that works or not, other than the fact in the last 3 years that I've done that, I've produced 3 clutches. So it, just by those results, the room naturally falls with temperature, as we get into that winter time. I've seen copulations as early as as early as late November, and all the way into February or March.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, I don't really change anything as far as temperatures go. The only real difference I do is the humidity and feeding.
Okay.
Is what I did that I could, say is different than a normal python breeding, I suppose you could say.
Sure. So, with your heat bulbs, do you ever vary the period in which they're on, or is it just kind of always a constant cycle that you have them?
No, it's always a constant. However, I have the herp stats where you can ramp them up. So I've got 3 hours of ramp time, and then at a peak and then 3 hours of down ramp time. And that usually coincides with kind of, a 12-hour. So 6 hours it's going, or over 6 hours, it's either going up, or 3 hours it's coming down.
Okay.
So the time in the middle is up to 85, 86. And if the female, so the females that I've had have both wrapped the heating element, what do you call it? The little cage around the heating element. They will wrap themselves around that. So I've upped the temperature, especially when they start doing that, because I know they're trying to get really warm. But
sure.
Yeah, other than that, everybody in here, supplemental heating turns off at night, no matter what season it is.
Sure. So is that just a 12 on, 12 off with that ramping period?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, 7 to 7.
Okay. I mean, I think that ramping period shouldn't be overlooked. The more time goes on, the more trial and error I have, the more I think that a potential shorter, heavy basking window during the day could be beneficial to these animals and kind of create more of a natural kind of circadian rhythm for them, so to speak, or basking movement pattern.
Well, and if you think about it, I've been in tropical areas of Mexico, Africa, things like that, and you wake up at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and it's not instantly 90 degrees. It takes a little bit. So that's kind of what gave me the ramping idea.
Sure.
Just experiencing that, like, that's not normal to just go from 75 or 72 to 90 in 15 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. At the peak of that day, have you ever experimented with temp gunning your females, like where they are directly underneath that bulb?
Yeah, I have some like temp gun records. Sorry. I mean, most of the time she was like temp gun of 88.6 on the hot spot where she was not laying. And then temp gunned her when she's laying there and she's like, 86.
Okay.
It's just some of the random notes that I jotted down just for my own curiosity.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said that you were seeing earliest copulations in November. Is that around when you start to pair?
Yeah. So I usually, like, around first part of November, I'll start to introduce. And it also, again, kind of depends on how everybody's looking. I think it takes a lot more. Well, I think breeding snakes in general takes a lot of observation. I think for a species like this that you have difficulty with, you have to tend to pay a lot more attention to what's happening. Most of the time, I think it was, so like with these little pass-throughs that I have, I would open a door to the male's cage and see what his reaction was. So that would be most of the behavioral observations that I would see or know that, okay, if he looks like he's not going to eat, or he acts like he doesn't want this rat, and he's cruising the cage at night because I look at him on the cameras or something, he's wanting to get in there. So she's got to be doing something. Sure.
Okay. And you're first seeing those behaviors around that period of time?
Yeah.
Okay. So from when you first see the copulation up until the point of them either going dark or going off food, what roughly is that period?
So the first copulations that I was seeing, like I said, was November, December. And during those times, I would keep the snakes together or have access to each other. And when they separated themselves, I would feed them. Okay. And like the first time, I remember the male and the female it was almost like clockwork, almost like every 7 days they would separate and I would feed them. And then I'd open their doors back up a couple days later. And honestly, I know it sounds silly, but it seemed like every Saturday I would walk in the room and they'd be locked up. So they kind of got on their own schedule a little bit.
Okay.
So it basically, that window would be November. I think a lot more of the heavy breeding I saw in January and February from my notes, my chicken scratch notes here. So you might see 1 or 2 copulations in November, December, but then January, February, I would see, like I saw three within a week in February.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Blake, how about you? So like the first time when you were successful finally, do you have record of when those first copulations were occurring?
Yes, I have them somewhere. We have, like, at the zoo, we have full records and stuff. And then I also just tend to, at least with these guys, I took photos of everything. And so, like, I kind of have, so it looks like about April 16th. It's probably about when they first really bred.
Okay.
I'm seeing early mid-May. She's looking really dark. Really starting to show. And then there was like a final copulation June 13th. And then saw ovulation on June 24th.
Wow.
I can get to egg laying is somewhere in here. I'm getting to it. Seeing lots of inverted. There we go. August 16th is when she laid.
Okay. Wow, that is almost the opposite of Shane's, more or less.
Yeah. And so since she had the multiple clutches or whatever, and that was the most successful one, I kind of think back, I think kind of how I did it was, I think the first time was like I put them together in like September, and they may have laid like December, January. The eggs were bad, and I waited a full calendar year until after she laid. So like it was the following January, I put them back together. Okay. And so then she laid more in the spring. And then, after that, I paired them up, what was that? I say May, whatever, the following year.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that definitely makes sense from the standpoint of recovery and getting that female prime to go again.
Yeah. I just went by, instead of going by season, I went by when I thought the female was ready. And I just thought, give her a full calendar year to recoup. And, and then she looked good at that point. So I just tried it again.
Yeah. So I guess then from your perspective, seasonality probably doesn't really quite matter as much with these snakes as some others.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think Halmahera is pretty close to the equator, so there's probably not a ton of seasonality. It's probably more slightly dry season.
Yeah.
Season. So.
Yeah, that's what I based my increasing humidity on the WeatherSpark app. There's kind of they show different graphs that look at humidity and everything, and temperature is pretty standard across the board throughout the year around there. But there's a peak of temperature and humidity around that September, November time frame on WeatherSpark, and that's kind of what I'm just going to turn the humidifiers on about that time. So, yeah, maybe they have more rains then. I don't know where their weather stations are there. I'm assuming they're probably on the top of a mountain or in the middle of a city. So, sure. Most of the things that I looked at as far as humidity and weather was constants, not necessarily the temperature or humidity itself, but where was it constant? Did we have any rise and falls? So
that makes a lot of sense. So Shane, I'll start with you on this question. How long before ovulation did the females go off of food?
So hold on just a second. It wasn't long.
Okay.
I mean, I think the female ate. Yeah. Yeah. So the female ate, I believe, a couple of weeks before she ovulated the first time, the first clutch that I got. Yeah. A couple of weeks. And it was difficult to see. She was spending a lot of time in the egg box or in the lay box.
Yeah.
So it was difficult to see true ovulation. I think I sent Blake pictures
Tough.
2 different times, 2 different weeks saying, is this an ovulation? So, I mean, I would say within a month is when she probably kind of stopped eating or stopped feeding.
Okay.
So
did you have like a refuse? Like, did she refuse for you, or is it kind of like that was your last meal and then she ovulated and you hadn't had an opportunity to
no,
talk?
she refused. They both, I have a note somewhere in here that they both refused feeding. And then a few weeks later was the ovulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Blake, how about your experience with that?
Yeah, she usually would feed all the way up until ovulation. Like, I think each time I probably gave her a meal within 2 weeks of ovulation. And I think the last time I gave her like a pretty big meal, and then pretty soon after that, she ovulated.
Okay.
And I kind of think maybe like that big meal is kind of what really set off that ovulation, what kind of helped lead to it. So.
By pretty big meal, what do you mean by pretty big meal?
I think I gave her like 2 rats instead of 1 kind of thing.
Like a large rat or like a medium, or
Like probably I think it was 2 mediums.
okay.
So I had an extra one. I gave it to her, so she was slightly bigger, and then like she really started getting big and ovulated within. I'm pretty sure it was within 2 weeks of that.
Okay, so probably like 200 to 250 grams worth of rat content. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. That makes sense. Have either of you guys noticed your males going into a shed cycle immediately after the females ovulate?
Can't say I've noticed it, but it may have happened.
Yeah, not that I've noticed. No.
Okay.
I did notice that in my last rough scale python breeding, which wasn't very successful, and the male didn't seem very interested in breeding. Even though I did get a small clutch, it didn't survive. But the male did, right after the female ovulated, the male went into a shed. I noted that.
Yeah, it's something I picked up on this year. This is the 4th or 5th year I've gotten scrub eggs, and this is the first year I've been like, this is all I'm doing. So I actually have been paying more attention. But every single female this year, right as she ovulated, the male that she was with immediately went into a shed cycle. And a couple of other people who have gotten clutches had noted the same thing. So I'm curious, because if it does seem to be consistent, that could be a really cool indicator to use for ovulation, because it can be so hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't write those notes down. Most of them are when the female sheds.
Yeah. Oh no, and it wasn't anything that I had written down either. It was just all of a sudden like, I think I'm realizing something, and I think I had a couple of green tree people comment on a couple lives that they had the same thing happen. So just an interesting observation. I'm trying to see how many people have caught on to the same thing. But then on that topic with the ovulation, I know Shane, you said it was difficult. She was kind of in the box. Blake, did it seem like she had a pretty obvious ovulation event to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could usually see it. Yeah, and so that after that, once she went into shed, is when I pulled her off exhibit and would put her, with the nest box and everything. So yeah, it was usually pretty obvious to me. She got huge.
Did you notice a difference in the ovulations that resulted in the bad clutches and then the third and final good clutch?
Can't say I did, because she never slugged out. It was like that first one, it was all fully shelled infertiles. They looked like good eggs. So I can't say I've noticed much of a difference between those. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, the most obvious ovulation that I've ever had on a scrub resulted in a full slug out, which I didn't expect at all. Yeah. It was very strange. I'm still trying to get better at catching it or knowing exactly what it is, because it's like one day you'll walk in and be like, oh, that has to be it, and then the next day you're like, okay, this is it. Like, I have my notes on my cages and I'm like, ovulation exclamation point, ovulation, 3 exclamation points. Like one of these has to be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, just kind of interesting to note. So from that prelay shed until you guys got eggs, how long was that?
I think mine were all right around 30 days, 30, 31, 32 days.
Yeah, I think between 30 and 35 usually.
Yeah.
Okay. Seems pretty in line with the rest of the scrubs.
Yeah, so I had a female shed on April 19th and laid 6 eggs on May 23rd.
Okay. Right over a month.
34 days.
Yeah.
Ish.
Okay. What kind of behavior patterns, Shane, were you seeing with your females once they were gravid and gestating their eggs?
Like I said, both females, every time they've had fertile eggs, I've seen them wrap around the heating element cage, protective cage, trying to get that heat. Obviously, belly up basking. A lot more use of the hide boxes, and that's kind of a weird thing I've been noticing. The Halmaheras, unless they're breeding or having breeding activity, they don't seem to use the hide boxes a ton around here. But I'm about the only one that comes in the snake room, so there's not much to hide from.
Sure.
And the female that had her first clutch, she had two cages that she could go between with separate lay boxes in different areas. And both times she laid, she picked the same box, whether I would, move it or clean it or whatever. If I put it in another cage, that's the box she chose.
Really?
Yeah. And maybe she had scented it and she felt comfortable there. But as far as any other behaviors, like I said, just seeking heat, stretching out, laying around, looking very uncomfortable. No real, I don't know if that I would say aggression, but definitely more sensitive to movement, would hiss a lot. No striking a glass, just loud puffing or loud hissing.
Sure. Just kind of like increased reactivity, more or less.
Yeah.
Do you leave
It's probably my fault for constantly checking on her.
I know how that goes. Do you leave that nest box in with the female year round, or do you put it in seasonally?
Yeah, everybody has some type of box, whether it be empty or with moss or whatever. But once I know they've ovulated or whatever, I'll, put moss in there. And then that's when she really goes in and starts. It's kind of like the rough scale pythons. They'll go in there and really start moving things around and creating kind of a cavity in there with the moss or whatnot.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you put the box in proximity to the heat bulb?
So, well, you can kind of see there's the heat emitter right there. And she, of course, has turned her box upside down, but pretty much directly underneath is where they've both been. I'd say probably 10 to 12 inches from the top of the egg box to the bottom of the heat emitter.
Okay.
And, and then again, I might turn it up during the day and with that ramping, but at night there's no heat on at all.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Do you notice her laying kind of positionally in the box, like under the heat or next to it, kind of pushed to the other side of the box?
I'd say more on the heat side inside the box.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The box isn't huge. It's only 12 inches long or so. So I don't know. And, an 8-foot snake, a gravid 8-foot snake fills up that box pretty good. So,
okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, she definitely seek heat.
Yeah.
When they're that far along.
Okay. Makes sense for sure. Yeah. And to Scott's comment, yeah, I do believe that is the case where like a lot of the the trappers out there, they know their nest sites that every year will be utilized, and not even always, I think, by the same females even.
Yeah.
So it would definitely make sense that scrubs would do that same thing, especially if they find a really good spot. So Blake, when you pulled your girl off exhibit once she was gravid, what was the enclosure like that you threw her in?
Pretty simple. Just 4-foot neodesha,
Okay.
with a hide box with moss. And then I fill the whole thing with moss just in case she, for whatever reason, doesn't lay inside the box, because, animals do silly things like that sometimes. But she always laid in the box, and it was basically those big black, typical, reptile hide box that you see. But I took 2 of those, one upside down, one on top, and connected, and then filled it with moss, and that worked pretty well.
Okay. And then kind of like what I asked Shane, how did you have the box positioned according to the heating element?
So yeah, the heating was on the other side, was, like ceramic heat emitter on top, on the side opposite from the hide box. And so she would just go out, belly bask under that, then go back in and stay coiled up and just kind of go back and forth.
Okay. Interesting. So kind of the opposite approach, but same positive result at the end. That's pretty cool. So I guess now let's move on to incubation. Blake, I guess I'll start back again with you. What was your incubation method and everything that you used once you got these eggs?
So some people will probably think I'm crazy for this, but actually the first 2 times I got eggs, we went with maternal incubation.
My hero.
It'd be awesome.
My supervisor at the time was he's a big advocate of it. And we also didn't have the greatest incubators at that time. They were ancient and not very good temperature control. And so we just left them with her. And she was a great mom, even when she laid the infertile ones. I could tell, she had a routine. Usually, I'd go by at certain times of the day, and I know, okay, it's 9 o'clock, she's going to be out basking. Sure. Okay, it's noon, she's going to be back on the eggs, that kind of thing. And she would just go out, bask, go back, wrap around them, and so she did great. So she's going to do that with bad eggs. Might as well let her do it with good eggs as well. And so that second clutch that had a few babies that survived till the end, was maternally incubated as well. But I don't know exactly why they didn't really absorb their yolk. And, I wondered if it was maybe too wet in the nest box. I'm not sure. That's just kind of speculation. So third time I was like, what, I've gotten so close. I just need to do it now. And it's also, as you can imagine, doing that for the first time with a species like that, watching her do it maternally is stressful. I've done maternal with other species, when I've bred a bunch of carpet pythons, I can do, carpet pythons maternally and not worry too much about it. But that, of course, is stressful to me. So last time I decided we got better incubators that I trusted. And so I just decided, this time I'm going to pull them and just hatch them this time. And want to go back and do maternal incubation sometime with scrubs. Yeah,
for sure. It's a bit of a teaser for the show I have coming up next week. It's going to be all about maternal incubating scrubs.
Awesome.
But anyway, so what was your egg box setup like once you pulled those eggs?
We did the no substrate method. Just a large, I think they're Cambro bins.
Okay.
Whatever. And then did the egg crate kind of on top of that and just put them on that. And I incubated them at about 87 degrees. I think 87.4 was what it was exactly.
Okay. And then how long did incubation take?
It was I think they hatched on day 87.
Okay.
Yeah,
some pretty standard. All right, cool. Shane, how about you? What was your I figured, did you pulled your clutches?
Yeah, I pulled all of them. Well, so the first clutch I got last year, I was actually what was I doing? I was heading to Tucson to go see my mom. And the morning I left, the female was laying eggs.
Oh, man.
So I pulled the 3 eggs that she laid and put them in the nest box, and then had my wife watch them closely. I had a Wise camera in her enclosure so I could see what she was doing, and it was set to go off if there was any movement. So what I noticed, like Blake said, is the female with the other 3 eggs that she laid after I left for my trip, she would go in and out of the nest box and, get a drink, roam around, bask, and then go back in. And then I actually had my wife, one of the times she'd gotten off of them, had her pull those eggs about 5 days later or so. So the first 3 went in the incubator, and then the other 3 went in about a week later.
Okay.
So anyway, so yeah, I've done false incubation for all my Halmahera eggs, and the way I set up the nest box is I don't know. It's probably about a 9 or 10 inch tall box and about 12 inches long.
Okay.
I can only fit one inside my 24 by 24 sea serpents incubator.
Okay.
So it's pretty tall, and I put about 3 inches of perlite, and then 2 light diffuser trays, and then a thin like rubber mat that you would line a cabinet with that's got holes in it so it's ventilated. And then put water in that. But so what I also do with the egg box is I will drill a hole about 1 inch on the side, about 1 inch from the bottom of the box. So basically in the perlite section, there's a hole. And then in the top of the egg box, there's 2 holes that are the same size, and then 2 also in the lid. And what I'll do is, and the reason behind that is in 1993, I was at a conference in Davis, California, and some chameleon breeders were talking about babies going full term and then dying in the eggs. And they talked about the increase of carbon dioxide when the babies are gassing off and they're starting to hatch. So that's what that hole is. In my mind, that hole is a ventilation so that heavier carbon dioxide can escape the box.
Sure.
And to maybe to mitigate dead in the egg babies. So that's how I set up the box. And then I also, in my incubator, will put a water bowl with water and a air stone. So the whole incubator itself is humid.
Okay.
And I don't, so that way, because before I've used where I was constantly trying to keep the egg box humid in a dry incubator, and it just didn't really make sense. And it didn't make sense to me to put the eggs in a completely airtight container either, because even a female python that's wrapped around eggs, if she's leaving them, they're exposed to air. I don't know why that was a thing other than humidity control. So if I'm controlling humidity in the incubator, then I don't really have to worry too much about how much I've got inside the box as far as actual water.
Sure.
So
what was the percentage you were maintaining outside of the egg box in the incubator chamber?
It was pretty humid. It would run. So I used those Govee. I mean, the Govee would tell me it was like 99 or 98% humidity inside the incubator itself, and then about the same inside the egg box. So it was pretty equal. That also helped with less condensation inside the egg box because the humidity inside and outside was pretty close to the same, and the temperature. So got less humidity or condensation in the box.
Yeah.
And my temperatures are about the same, 80, 87, 87 and a half.
Okay. And same kind of hatch period?
Yeah. I think for all 3 clutches, it was either 81 or 82 days. I don't remember which one was 82, but yeah.
Okay. Cool. What were the sex ratios from your guys' clutches? I guess Shane, you want to start off with your clutches?
Yeah. So the first clutch I got was 6 eggs, was 3.3. Pretty perfect. The second clutch I got, which was the first one, which was the first clutch I got last year, was out of the 6 eggs, only 4 hatched. And that was 3.1. Yeah. 3.1. And then the second clutch I got was all 6 hatched, even though one of the babies died about 2 weeks after it hatched. Was 5.1.
Damn,
yeah.
That kind of hurts.
They're still Halmahera pythons. I don't care.
Oh, sure. No, trust me. I've had far more male heavy scrub clutches than female. I had a couple this year that really kind of kicked me in the gut. I had a small clutch of Marukis that were it was only 4 babies, but it was all male. So it's like I went through sex and was like, oh, every single one. I'm like, God damn it, not even one female.
Yeah, I had a clutch of Savu pythons 2 or 3 years ago that 9 eggs and 9 males.
All right, I'm not going to complain. You win.
Not sure what I did, but
yeah, I was wondering for a little bit if there was some sort of temperature sex determination going on there, but I don't know. For me, the jury is definitely still very much out because I incubated a bit cooler this year and still had a couple with results that I wasn't super thrilled with. So, and I mean, I had some hatch day 95, so they took their sweet time coming out. Some day 95 males that just kind of hatching, giving me the double bird. Like, you tried to make me a girl, fuck you. But
I think Chuck, his clutches went 90 some days, and he incubated pretty cool. I want to say either 84 or 85 degrees, if I remember right.
Okay.
So
I'm curious what his sex ratios came out to be out of those.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know his first clutch was 5 animals, but I don't remember the sex ratio.
Okay. Blake, how about your clutch?
I think it was 2.3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess inconclusive, we'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think there really has been any sort of legitimate confirmed temperature sex determination in pythons, right?
Not that I've ever seen.
Yeah. Seems to be much more of a colubrid thing as far as snakes go.
I mean, that's an experiment you can do because you're getting multiple clutches a year of different scrubs. I mean, you can play around different temperatures and to see the sex ratios.
Yeah, I still am jury out on it. But the one thing I will say, for the most part, my clutches were sitting right around 86 this year. Much bigger, more robust, quicker feeding babies out of that compared to a couple of years where I was like between 87 and 88. And smaller, relatively smaller. And like when I my Highland clutch from last year, I think out of 12 babies, like 3, maybe 4 were eager feeders off the jump. I had to try every trick in the book otherwise to get them onto food. So again, another just like kind of anecdotal evidence, but could be something. I guess time will tell on that. Here comes Scott to crush my hopes and dreams on sex and you know what? It was worth a shot. It was worth a weird, crazy thought process with no real basis. So anyway, kind of the next step in the process, William asked this question a lot earlier, establishing the babies and then comparing them to wild caughts of maybe a similar size, or just wild caughts in general. How how did that go for you guys? How was it to get these little babies established? I guess Blake, I'll start back with you since you had the first ones.
Yeah, I believe they all ate first try. Maybe one or two of them ate second try, and they were all a little bit different. Some actually took them off tongs. A couple of them just left alive, rat pink or something overnight, and they took them.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't too terrible. Nothing like trying to get an established wild caught one,
Sure.
doing that. So this one male I have from that Shane produced, he's just, I don't know, 6-7 months old or so. He can still be a little finicky for me. I can only feed him in the middle of the night, and I have to tease feed him a little bit before he'll take it. But, whereas I have basically some Tanameras from Ryan Young that are about the same age, and they will come meet me at the door and grab it, any time of day. So.
Fair enough. How about you, Shane?
I can't remember if it was difficult because I know it was stressful. Just because, what they were. So the first 6, if I remember right, I never had to resort to any type of assist feeding with the first 6. I started with a small, like, furry mouse just to see who would take what.
Sure.
I think one ate right off the bat. That's the real gold one that I have shared a few pictures of. Mm-hmm. He started eating the first time straight off the bat. They're typical. I think they shed within the first 3 weeks or so, or a month, and then that's when I kind of started feeding trials or whatever. They never really lost a lot of weight they lost a little bit, but not a ton. So yeah, I'd start with that, and then eventually, try the just teasing them. And what I found started to work was, I can't remember who it was. Someone said something about trying to get green trees to eat by touching about a couple inches or maybe a half inch or so on the neck of the snake, and you kind of
that turn reaction,
get that turn response, and or present it to them and let them smell it, and then pull it away, and then give it back to them again, because they, I don't know if they think, oh, it almost got away, I better grab it. So getting it to go back and forth, that helped a lot. The guys that I have now from last year had a little bit more difficulty, so I resorted to kind of what I do with the baby rough scales, is feeding them the mouse legs. And I only had to do that with 2 or 3. And it got to a point where after the first week or 2 of trying to do that, I would just put the mouse leg in their mouth, and they would like, oh, I'm eating, and take it on down.
Okay.
Some of them, so as far as, shyness, I would say these second 2 clutches that I had were a lot more shy for some reason than the first clutch that I got. I also noticed that I even had one snake that went about 3 months before he even had his first shed, which was kind of weird.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Blake, have you experienced that at all with either your Halmaheras or just any scrubs in general?
So, so the clutch of Halmaheras I produced, they actually ate before their first shed, and because it got to be like, it's been several weeks and they hadn't shed yet. So I was like, well, might as well try feeding them. And they all ate. And then that's when they started shedding, was after their first meal, after a little over a month, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. I've had a wide array of results. So I think I've had some shed as soon as probably 2 weeks from hatching. And the one that went the longest was 6 months. From the Waminas that I produced this year, I have like 5 or 6 that have had their second shed, and I have 3 that still haven't had their first shed. So, I mean, do you guys have any ideas as to why that happens with these guys?
I have no idea.
Oh.
I know I did also in that first clutch that I got last year, had a couple snakes that looked like they had a little bit smaller eyes.
Okay.
So I don't know if I also in July of last year when the eggs were incubating, we had a power outage for about a day. So the incubator got cooler. Couldn't tell you if that had any effect on anything, but that was the same clutch that the little snake didn't shed for a couple months or whatever. But yeah, I couldn't tell you. I don't know if it's nutritional or some sort of maybe a inbreeding depression. I don't know that anybody's ever figured out. Some people say that Halmaheras come from all the same place in northern Maluku or whatever. Are they too related? And we're starting to see inbreeding depression already, but I wouldn't think so from an island species.
Yeah, because then you'd have to think that they would have some amount of a resistance towards that being a limited population.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting or a relief to know that somebody else sees the same thing.
Yeah, if anyone sees it, it's me. And there's no consistency to it at all. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to kind of piece together some sort of. I guess the one thing I will say, I haven't had one go a long time without shedding that eats like a champ. But I will say I've probably had some babies put down 4 or 5 meals before their first shed. But that's like if they start like first time offer, they eat every time subsequent. Yeah, it's strange. Yeah, I never wait for the first shed anymore, at least. I think maybe my first clutch I did, but they all shed pretty quickly. So I think probably the soonest I've had one take a meal after hatching is probably actually my last clutch. The snake may not have been even 10 days old when I took like a live fuzzy mouse. But yeah, just a bit of experimenting on it just to see kind of what these snakes really do.
Yeah, I have a little bit too much old school in me because any other pythons I've ever had, you wait till they shed and you start trying to feed them. So
sure. I think that was probably always kind of how I had thought too. But like when I had some clutches, like, all right, they're not even like showing signs of even, going remotely into shed. I'm like,
yeah,
this thing might be a month old soon. I got to try to get something in them. Damn.
I think, don't short-tailed pythons kind of do the same thing? They'll not have their first shed for several months before.
That's what I believe.
Yeah, I've bred short tails once, and it was like 3 months before they all shed. They took a bunch of meals before that.
Yeah, and that seems to be across the board with all the short tails that they all do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting. I wonder if Bolins have some of the similar time periods of that shed or Owen Pelly pythons. It'd be interesting to see. I have no clue, but
I wish I could answer that.
It's kind of more of a hypothetical. But Shane, another thing I wanted to talk to you about, correct me if I'm wrong, one of your females you bred back-to-back years, correct?
I did, but I didn't get anything. So
okay.
Yeah, my OG female, she laid in 2021, and then she did breed again in 22, or I tried in the 22 season, but nothing happened. She didn't show any of the signs. Yeah, and then she did the first clutch in 2023.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I have a picture on my Facebook page from that. The copulation, you can actually see the hemipene going into her cloaca. It's a pretty close up, obvious shot of copulation, and still nothing happened. So
okay,
and that's kind of what I was going to mention too. Is it's kind of hard once they start breeding. When we talked about doing the seasonal feeding, because she lays eggs in May, and that's about the same time you start kind of backing food off of everybody, for the summer, but you want to get her back up to a good weight. And she railed rats, a week or two after she laid, once she stopped, looking for eggs or, got past that stress. But, and I don't know if that would have anything to do with it. I don't know if that would have anything to do with not being successful in that second year. Maybe she just didn't have enough, but she had pretty good body condition, so I don't know that I'd want to try 2 times I did, but
sure. Yeah, it's definitely a weird one. A handful of people have had successful back-to-back clutches. But it definitely seems to be kind of the outlier. Blake, do you have any thoughts on repeating with Halmaheras or scrubs in general?
Yeah, but I think usually it's best to give them an extra year because they do lay such large eggs, and it seems to take a lot out of them.
Yeah,
I don't know, with the Halmahera female, I didn't feel comfortable doing any sooner than a full calendar year after she had laid the last time. So I figured at that point, if she's going to breed, that was enough time. So
yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, if you're sticking to the typical Python breeding schedule where you're pairing them, in the late fall, early winter, and you're doing that on that same schedule every year, I'd probably skip a year.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of the times the females will do that anyway. I've kind of half-assed tried with some females to go back to back, and they, even some of them won't even be receptive of the same male that bred them the previous year.
Yeah, I think I've seen some people have it where that second year it's a lot of slugs and very few good eggs, that kind of thing.
That happened to me with the first barneck that I bred. She laid at like early April of 2020. And then I tried to breed her again the next year. I didn't get any sort of copulation until about that same time a year later, even though I had been trying prior. She laid in July, about when her previous clutch had hatched. And they were all fully shelled, fully veined. But the one thing that from the jump got me really like, oh, okay, something's going on here. They did not adhere to each other one bit. I pulled her up and they just rolled out. And one by one, they all crashed out until the entire clutch went bad. So, that was definitely a lesson learned there. But definitely also has me thinking like, well, why would she have put herself through that in the first place if she wouldn't have been in the proper condition and there's a million factors that go into it. But it was definitely interesting to me that she was kind of on like almost a complete opposite end of the year kind of cycle, that second go around, with the same environmental stimulus. So it's kind of an interesting observation, I guess.
Stephen, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So we were going back to the breeding observations. Sorry, this crossed my mind. One thing I did notice in the female is when I did do the initial introductions, the female would almost fight the male off, like bump him as he was pursuing her.
Interesting.
And spurring her and stuff. I didn't know if you'd seen anything like that because I put that original female with another male another year, and the other male seemed to be like when she bumped him off or bumped him away, he was like, oh, okay, she doesn't want any part of me. But it seemed like the male that she was successful with, his pursuit succeeded in their copulation. I didn't know if you'd ever seen anything like that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen kind of similar to what you were saying. And I would say that the females that did that for me are ones that just had a more defensive kind of temperament in the first place. And I think we're almost more upset with me opening their enclosure and putting something else into it. and they were all kind of fixated on me, but the male was pursuing her actively, and she would kind of bump him, and he would be totally unfazed by it. And actually, I've even had a couple times where, particularly the defensive female, I'll be introducing a male, and like she maybe hit the glass once or twice before I put the male in, and she'll just straight up bite the male and then look back at me, and he'll act like nothing happened at all. It's this big dramatic thing. I'm like, oh my God. And the male just like sits there, just tongue flicking his spot. I'm like, you didn't feel that at all, did you? You have one thing on your mind only. That's, hey, more power to him in that case. But yeah, I think I've seen that in some cases, like right first thing into the introduction, but later that day or onward, typically it's either she's receptive and they're together, or she goes in the box and he's not allowed in, and he's on the cool side or behind the box or something like that. So
yeah, I've seen a similar thing with the rough scales too, and my female rough scale is puppy dog tame. So that's why I was kind of wondering, because it didn't seem to go with their if they're have a fractious personality, didn't seem to match with that. But
yeah, that makes sense. Blake, did you experience anything like that?
No, I don't think I saw that. I think he either went to another side of the cage, or they started breeding fairly quickly, though.
Sure.
Probably most of the time, like I pair them up and I didn't see them together that day, and then I come into work the next day and they'd be locked up first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. And if I have already brought this up earlier, tell me that I have, and we don't have to do it again. But given that you were working in a display type of setting, how did you rotate the animals around to fulfill what you wanted to do for breeding, but also the needs of a zoological display that multiple animals is always more engaging for people? How did you manage that?
Yeah, for the most part, like as long as I had one of them on display, like the management's not going to care. So there are certain times of year where I'd only have one if I'm not trying to breed them at all or anything. And then usually they were on whenever trying to breed them. Though now, like I've got the pair on exhibit together year round. So
yeah.
And it's also like, and part of that is just like, they're in even bigger enclosure now than when I bred them before. It's like 5 by 4 by 6 or so.
Okay.
And so to pull one of them off, it'd be into something smaller. So for me, it's like, well, I'll just keep them together in that nice big cage, and they're going to do what they're going to do. So
sure. I mean, what do you think as far as like, from someone, a private keeper standpoint, do you think that doing a permanent cohab like that would make it more difficult to have them kind of keyed into that cycle because they're used to each other? Or do you think that there could be some virtue to a long-term cohab in a big enough enclosure with scrubs?
Yeah, I think it can be like when, I'm not necessarily trying very hard to breed them right now because they're
Sure.
ancient, and I just haven't seen really anything in like 2 years. So I'm kind of like, okay, they're probably pretty much retired now. But like
Sure.
back when I was like actively trying really hard, if I didn't see anything for a while, I might pull one of them off for, several days or a week or so, and then reintroduce them. And sometimes that would kind of kick things off again. So
Sure.
I think if they're continuing to breed and stuff, just put them in there. If winter comes and they're going to start breeding and you can manage them together, that's fine. Typically, I think probably most hobbyists will have a smaller cage than what I had them in. So it's a little bit more difficult. If they were, where they were so big, I could feed them together inside there and just hand them both a rat if they're on opposite sides, and then just kind of keep an eye on them. And they usually ate about the same speed. I actually can't do that anymore. The females slowed down a bit in their old age. And so I actually have to pull one of them off because the male will eat fast and then go try and steal hers. So
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Shane, do you ever have any aspirations of doing anything like that, or are you pretty content with the system you've created for yourself?
I'm actually in the process of this entire wall. I'm going to turn into 14 cages that are all interlocked. So with those 14 cages, I'll probably have about 10 animals so that they can, with transfers, so that they can move between cages. So like you might have one animal that have access to 2 cages at the same time.
Okay.
I'm in school, so it's taking a lot longer than I wanted, but I'm going to have vertical cages and horizontal cages, all about 4 feet, 4 by 2 by 18.
Okay.
So I am going to change things up a little bit, especially with, I think we're still maybe a couple of years off from the 2021 babies that we have. But I think that's a good time to get things changed so that they can establish in that new system. And the female that had the second clutch last year, I put her in a new cage that connected with these, and she bred with the male in less than a month. So changing her cage did not affect her breeding. So
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely good. Yeah, that's always something that I wrestle with, is like some sort of stimulus of change, whether or not that would throw them off or not. But with what you just said about that quick change, that probably, lends towards these animals being pretty hardy to change, as long as their parameters are staying relatively, uniform.
Yeah. And that being said, I've told my wife we can't ever move out of this house because this is where they breed, in this room. But honestly, I would love to, I live in Kansas, so it gets cold, and but I'd love to have outdoor enclosures just to, be able to, especially, any of the wild caught animals, as a personal thing, just say, given the opportunity to have different things, especially these older wild caught animals, if they have a couple clutches and we move on with the second and third generation breedings, and they can retire to hang out outside or whatever in the good season. So
yeah, that'd be really cool. So yeah, on that kind of good transition there. What are you guys kind of doing as far as your approaches to, now with this F1 generation? What are the plans for making this F2 next generation?
Well, like I said, so I sent a pair to Blake as just, kind of, if 2 of us are working on it, then, more the better.
Sure.
I'm kind of hoping that with some of the animals that I still have here, that we can kind of work with some of the other people that are breeding them or having some success, and do a little trading to try and diversify.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I'm working towards. I don't know, like I said, I don't know how closely related some of these animals are. So it would be nice to try and kind of find those things out where, maybe there are localities that we should be sticking to. If animals that come from the north side of the island, we should keep breeding them together, or animals that come from the east side, or those animals that come from the south that have a reduced pattern. I can't remember the name of the island that they were on, but there was some pictures in the Barker's book, and people have shared pictures of them on, I think, INAT.
Yep. Yeah, there's a couple on INAT that are like shockingly different. The striped appearance look.
So maybe that's the direction to go in. Mostly it's just, eventually I'd like to get to a point where people have success with these animals, with the captive animals that we've produced.
Yeah, absolutely. How
long that may take, I don't know, because I don't want any of them to leave my house.
I could only imagine. So what age are you guys shooting for as far as the first time when you're going to try some of these females?
I think so. The Oklahoma animal from Blake is now 5 years old. I think she's getting close. I would say within the next maybe 2 years, try and get her bred with one of the 2021 males that I have. She's a real dark animal with large blotches, and I have another male that kind of looks similar, that I have in mind to put them together and, see what we get. But I would say hopefully within the next 2 years at least, with that female, and maybe 3 with the 2021 animals. At that point, they'll be 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Blake, do you feel kind of the same way about that?
Yeah. I've got one of the 2021 animals right up here. Maybe in about 2 years, we'll see how big she is. I might, throw them together, but probably 3 years is more realistic. So,
yeah, fair enough.
Just my guess.
It would be nice to know, because, we talked about the wild caught animals taking so long to acclimate. But, these 2021 animals, they're between 3 and 4 feet long, but they don't look like they're big enough to breed.
Sure.
And I would venture to guess that they'd have to be a minimum of 5 years old. I'm definitely not going to push it, by any means, but it would be interesting to see if, what that actual age is. I don't know what it would be in the wild, and, maybe wild animals are pretty small when they have babies.
Well, I don't know if either of you guys heard the episode I did with Daniel Natouche a little while ago, but we talked about the age where some of these females are breeding in the wild. And, he was saying that he's seeing, physical evidence internally on 3-year-old females of reproduction.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, that conversation blew my mind and kind of made me kind of rethink everything that I, been told about scrub pythons over the years. And that last, I guess this year, I had a clutch from a 5-year-old, or I guess she was like 4.5-year-old captive bred female. The clutch was no good, and the circumstances weren't really great. She was in a rack, and I didn't try to cycle her or anything. She just suddenly had follicles, and I decided to throw a male in, and they've locked up. But I'm considering experimenting with breeding some younger animals, but then at the same time, I'm like, I put all this work into this captive bred female, and I don't want to be impatient and breed her a year early and kind of screw things up for myself going forward. So it's definitely it's a difficult kind of mental predicament, but hearing that these things are breeding so young in the wild makes you think, well, if they're doing that there, certainly they can do it here.
Yeah.
I don't know. Definitely.
I tend to grow pretty slow and kind of take my time, and I don't usually breed things at like the earliest of when they can breed. It's usually a year or 2 after that. Just my personal belief. I don't know. So
I mean, the eggs that I got, they're so big, I don't know, and maybe it's because of the size of the female, but we're looking at 100 or 10.3 centimeter long eggs that weighed about 121 grams each. So, they're 3.5, 4 inches long, and about as big around as a little bit bigger around than a ping pong ball.
Sure.
I mean, they're sizable eggs, and
yeah,
sizable to rough scale or Brettles pythons.
Sure.
I would say they're comparable to ball python eggs, if not a little bigger.
Yeah, that's always the comparison that I draw. This is like a ball python egg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if a smaller female could handle eggs like that, or if her eggs would be that big. If she's
the female that I got that small clutch from, that there was like infertiles and whatnot in the mix. There was actually one egg in there that was probably the biggest scrub egg I've ever had, ironically, but it was like elongated. It was almost kind of like a giant colubrid egg. But yeah, that to me, I feel like the barometer that I try to use is like, if this female can eat like a decent sized large rat, she can probably fit a scrub egg inside her.
Yeah.
So, and then like I had a wild caught female bar neck I bred in 22. She was probably just shy of 8 feet long. So this was like a kind of, let's see what happens breeding. And I got 8 eggs out of her. 7 were good. And then this year she laid 14 at about, probably put another foot on in the meantime, which definitely kind of gave me like a bit of a confidence about breeding a smaller female, because I think there's a lot of talk and rightfully so in some other species of like stunting a female's reproductive capabilities going forward with an early breeding, which would be another thing I'd be worried about of trying a female, captive bred scrub too young. Is like, okay, you got 5 eggs and now 2 years later you're going to get 6 or 7 when you could have waited and gotten 13 and then 14 2 years later or something like that. So there wasn't really a question there, just kind of a rambling thought process. But
one thing I've noticed with, so the Savu pythons that I have are 2012. So
okay,
the one thing I've noticed, there's kind of that bell, where her first clutch that I had was 2 eggs. The next clutch was 5. The next clutch was 9, and then 7. Oh, wow. And then I think the last 2 clutches she's had have been a little bit smaller. So now, is that the male? I've used 2 males on her, so I tend to believe maybe that's follicle development. But I also know that some of the other females that I have, the mother to them was almost 20 years old when she had her clutch. So, and she had 6 or 7. So I don't know if they only have a certain amount of reproductive capability, and if you tap that too early, does it reduce the number of eggs per clutch?
Yeah. Blake, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's all speculation. I mean, it could be, the smaller clutches are more of what they're likely to do in the wild. That, they may not be having 14 egg clutches, and upwards of that in the wild. It may be more, 5 to 10. So they don't tend to be as big in the wild as we have them here, because they may feed them more on a regular schedule and feeding them bigger items and things like that. So could go either way.
Yeah, certainly could. So I guess the last thing I kind of want to cover, and this is looking years into the future. But I want to know what you guys think as far as of the try to put the right way to put it. I guess like popularity in the marketplace eventually of these captive bred Halmahera scrub pythons. What do you guys see as the future of captive Halmaheras? Given that a good enough population can be established to where there's no concern about losing these things again in the midst of the hobby. Is this even something you guys are even really considering at this stage of the game?
I've kind of, so it's funny because people that aren't snake people that know that I breed snakes and they know that I bred the Halmaheras, and I kind of explained to them it's pretty special because they're so rare.
Yeah.
And their instant thought is, oh my God, they must be worth a ton of money. And it's like, well, I don't care what they're worth.
Right.
The thing is, in my mind, they're such a I don't know if you call it novel species or whatever, but there may only be 20 people in the world that care about them enough to, make it last, the next 10, 20 years or keep them around. So
sure.
Are there enough people that want them, or that, like I said, my goal is I would like in 20 years, some kid has a Halmahera python and he knows that it's from something that I bred or Blake bred or something like that, and they can get that history from it. I don't know that they'll ever be. Now, I know I won't be able to, flood the market with them anytime soon. That's for sure. But
Right.
Nor
everybody,
it would be nice if the fact that we're captively breeding them increases their popularity, where people are not so afraid. Like I look at Boland's pythons. I'm not going to spend $12,000 on a Boland's python because they don't have a history of doing well.
Right.
Now, if I had the money, sure, I would keep it just as a pet. But and I don't want Halmahera pythons to get to that kind of a point either. That's another reason I'm a little concerned about selling them. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Right.
So it's just easier for me to keep them.
Absolutely.
And I hope, I guess back to my point is, I hope that just knowing that they're captively produced successfully, say in the next 5 to 10 years, someone is more likely to say, I want one of those because it's a beautiful snake. And I know it's going to do well because it's, been, produced F2, F3 animal. So,
yeah. Basically we have dreams of that happening someday, but who knows if it will happen. And like, I don't know if they'll ever get as popular as some of the other ones, like Luckins are kind of all the craze and people go nuts for them. I don't know if, even if they were more common, if they would get to that kind of popularity.
Sure.
But, I don't know. There may be a little bit more niche in the scrub python world. Certain people love them. I've talked to people that have kept a bunch of scrub pythons and they're like, yeah, I'm just not into the Halmaheras. They're just, they don't act like scrubs to me. So.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I almost see them as like the best pet scrub python captive bred because they're generally pretty mild mannered. They're not quite as reactive upon first entrance to the enclosure as like a barneck can be. They're not quite as big as, Amethystina and Clastolepis. And then they're not flighty like Tannenbars. I probably have more inquiries for Halmaheras than barnecks. I have lots of people that contact me interested in them. I think the first thing that gets them is the size, that they're probably not going to be a 10, 11 foot snake, especially if you don't feed them to be a 10 or 11 foot snake. And then honestly, like if they see some of the ones that you guys are posting, some of these like gold captive bred ones, that's not the typical dirty Halmahera import with his jungle skin that most people probably have that image in their head. I have a couple imports that are longer term captive that were brought in pretty small that like are high yellow, not quite to the extent that your guys are, but enough to where that animal catches the eye of somebody who likes the look of a Clasto or a high contrast barneck. I think that the awareness is starting to happen now because of guys like you guys who are not only producing them but like actually making it known in some sort of public forum. This is what these animals are. I think it's getting the attention of a lot of python people.
Yeah, when I started looking at keeping them, you could hardly find a picture of one online.
Right.
So, and a lot of them weren't that great of photos. So, it's definitely a lot more accessible now.
Yeah.
Now, we'll say, like you mentioned the size. I've worked with several males, including the male we have at the zoo right now that is every bit of 12 feet.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
He's gigantic.
I've worked with a few others that are that size. The other male we used to have at the zoo was every bit of that size as well. And he's long and lean. I don't overfeed my animals, especially males. And he's a beast. And
he's 20 years old too, right?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he hasn't been power fed or anything. He just has slowly grown over time. He's probably 7-8 feet when, I first started working with him, and now he's huge.
That's crazy. Man,
Yeah, he was huge in 2015 when I first saw him.
Yeah, and he's probably gotten at least a little bit bigger than that.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean the male that I sent to Shane, that one was like a beast of a Halmahera to me, and that thing was probably maybe 8.5 feet tops. So,
well, I'd have to say when he came out of that bag, I was impressed. I was intimidated, and I hadn't been intimidated like that when I first got the first 2 males. There was a big male in there, and he was very, very pissed off, and that was the only other time I've been that intimidated by a snake. He's a good sized guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah. 12. I mean, I'd love to see a snake like that in person. I mean, 12-foot Halmahera, that's got to be just, I mean, the first time you lay eyes on that snake in person, that's got to be like a surreal experience of like, is this really what I'm looking at? Like this giant Halmahera.
Well, and even in older cage that they were in, that they bred in, that was the first one I saw him in. He's an impressive size, even in a 6-foot tall cage.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
How big was the female that he bred, Blake?
About 9 to 10 feet. So
Okay.
She's right about 10 feet, I would guess, right now.
Okay. So pretty much in line with like what you see with Amethystina or Classilepis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
And looking at him, you can kind of tell like that's the male. He's got that gigantic head.
Yeah.
A little bit more elongated. Hers is a little smaller and a little bit more, almost seems a little more blunt. So,
yeah, for sure. I've definitely noticed that. I feel like, all the scrubs get fairly sexually dimorphic once they hit a certain size.
Yeah.
Where you can almost tell with like 90% accuracy just by head and tail structure. This is a male, this is a female.
Yep.
Yeah. Makes it pretty easy because the prospect of sexing some of those snakes doesn't sound too fun to me. Having to probe a 12-foot scrub, it's like, I'd rather not.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, like if we're with these snakes at the zoo, like if we're doing vet stuff with them or anything, like I'll tube them like I would like a venomous snake. Like I'm also not a big fan of like grabbing snakes behind the head.
Sure.
Because I just feel like you're just wrenching on their neck, and that can't be good for them. So like with them, we've got some big tubes. I'll just throw them in a tube and hold them that way, and I think that's just better for them and a little easier to work with.
Yeah, that's how I do it too. Even if I'm just pulling them out for maintenance, I'll use a tube rather than trying to manipulate the head in some way or grab the neck. It's just a lot quicker and easier to get their head to go in there. So
interesting.
I don't know if it's less stressful, but it's easier for me.
Yeah. Fair enough. I just have my caveman methods over here. Oh, that's funny. Oh man. Well, I mean, that was some pretty heavy hitting Halmahera conversation. I know this will definitely be something that I have to come back and take notes on later. But I guess I'll start with you, Shane. Do you have any aspirations on branching out into other types of scrub pythons, or are you pretty much set on your Halmahera project?
I'm always key to branching out. This room is 12 feet by 8 feet, and it's full. So
fair enough.
Yes, I would love to do. So I'd like to do the tandem bars for sure someday. But the Halmaheras will win out space on pretty much anything. I'm also working on a second generation of rough scale pythons. So, trying to get to that point too. So
sure.
The hounds are kind of at the top of the hill, and they probably will be for a long time.
Yeah.
Like I said, if I move to another house and I can get my own building or a room, we'll look at some other stuff, but the hounds are definitely going to be long-term future project.
Yeah, absolutely. And Blake, I know obviously that, you know, halmaheras are not the only thing that you're doing with scrub pythons, but what's kind of your long-term vision with the scrub project overall?
I mean, I would kind of like at least a pair or two of just about every form or locality if I can.
Sure.
Just I like them all. They're all fun, and be able to try and help, you know, keep them, or, you know, keep captive bred stock of them. So, top of my list of what I don't have now is Tannenbars. They're probably my second favorite after halmaheras. So, I always like them a lot.
Yeah, definitely. They're fun. It took me 6 years to find the first Tannenbars that I was able to get. It seemed like they were available and pretty consistent, and then just very hard cutoff. They were just gone for quite a while.
And Moluccans used to come in all the time.
Yeah.
And just nobody's collecting them anymore. You know, very rarely. It's used to get them with no problem.
Are yours captive hatched or imports?
The Tannenbars?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all wild caughts.
Oh, okay.
So I was lucky enough to be able to put a 3.3 group together with all 4 phenotypes. So yeah, that was definitely, then they've not been the easiest. I mean, I still have some that'll give me some feeding troubles every now and then. But I've had them for a couple of years now, but I'm at least going to be able to give them a shot this year. I have one female that I think has gotten to the point where I got her as an adult wild caught, but she's had like about a year and a half to kind of settle in, and she's acting more like a captive scrub now than originally, I'd feel like. So that would be cool. That'd be really cool, but we'll see. I'm not in a crazy rush, I guess, especially considering I'm just working with a bunch of wild caught stuff, but that'd be a fun one to be able to do.
Well, if you get some babies, it sounds like it would be a viable trade for some baby halmaheras for some baby Tannenbars.
Yeah, I think that might beat out any other offer I've had on the table.
Like I said, I'd be more willing to trade for some Tannenbars than I would to sell them, just because they'd go to you, and I don't want to hassle with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it'd be awesome to have some captive bred halmaheras in the mix. This will be the first time I have like a legitimate shot this year at trying to do it. So
that'd be cool.
We'll see. We'll see. I have a few females that are definitely old enough. Whether or not they're big enough, I think, is probably the next question. But they're all like probably just shy of 8 feet. 7 to 8 feet. So
big enough. I think they can breed a lot smaller than, and typically would breed a lot smaller than we would think.
Yeah,
like 6 feet.
Yeah, I had 2 females earlier this year, develop follicles. But it was when I paired 2 females accidentally. I had one female, knew as a female. She had some follicles, so I threw my male in, and I just noticed that the male was looking a little bit thicker than I'd like him to be. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to start to breed. I'm going to breed them. I'm going to just take them off food for a little while. And then one day, a couple months later, I'm like, man, for being a male that's been off food for 2 months, you're awful thick in the back third. So I palpate him on the way back into the enclosure. I'm like, oh, nope, you are a girl. So, like, no wonder you showed no interest in that female downstairs. My God.
It's nicer when it happens that way. I've had it before where it's like I pair up a pair of snakes, and why is the female trying to breed the male?
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. Well, I mean, we've been at this for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I don't want to keep you guys too long. And Blake, I know you're not feeling the best today, but I appreciate you powering through. So I guess Shane, I'll start with you. For anybody who is interested in keeping up with everything that you're doing online, where can you be found?
Well, I sometimes post on Facebook and Instagram. I'm always down if someone wants to message me and just chat about snakes. I'm cool with that too. So I'm not a big breeder. Like I said, I'm basically in a large closet in the basement. So
Yeah.
Nothing special. Just that's what the picture that we sent was, a couple old guys that breed snakes.
Nothing
So,
special. Just 3 clutches of captive bred Halmahera scrub pythons. Yeah, nothing special. I think that's the way I would describe that.
sorry. Yeah, I don't have a big online presence, but anyone's more than welcome to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram.
Well, I'm more than happy to boast for you then.
Okay.
All right. So Blake, how about you? Where can people get a hold of you on the socials and whatnot?
Yeah, you can just find me on Facebook, Blake Bauer, or on Instagram, Python Central. I tend to post more reptile stuff on my Instagram, and I, like Shane, I don't have a huge online presence. I'm kind of a recluse, so I don't post a lot. But absolutely, if you ever want to talk Halms or scrubs or anything, feel free to message me. I will answer, and always happy to give advice or help or look at cool photos of your scrubs. I don't care.
Cool. Hell yeah. Well, again,
could I say one more thing?
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. No problem.
So a couple of years ago, I kind of had an idea of trying to get kind of a stud book, if you will, of people that had Halmaheras, and then just kind of keep track of where those animals go, whether they bred, died, whatever, and didn't get a lot of traction. So I guess I want to use this platform to say, if you have animals and you're willing to share some information, like where they came from, how big they are, how long you've had them, and whatever, I kind of want to keep that information. I'm not going to share it with anybody. I just want to, for my own understanding, if anyone has any of that information, that'd be super cool too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I could definitely get you information about the ones that I have, and then point a few people in your direction who I know have a little group of them going. So
right on.
But yeah, that's definitely a great idea as far as just keeping everything on the straight and narrow going forward, as far as, making sure that bloodlines are diverse and, we're all set up for multiple generations of unrelated, or as unrelated as we reasonably can assume they are, captive bred Halmaheras.
Yeah.
So,
and any data is going to be beneficial for us to understand. So
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. This was a jam-packed conversation of top tier information. So I was really, really happy we were able to get this done.
I hope we answered everyone's questions.
Yeah.
I think more than answered them all. Yeah, absolutely.
Right on.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Well, if you want to stick around for a second, I'll just close out the show real quick. But again, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciated this. All right.
Anytime.
All right, guys, that was a great episode. Definitely one of my favorites so far. One that I definitely will need to listen to again. But for me, you can find me on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd, and Stephen Kush on Facebook. For any scrub fans out there, check out the new Somalia group on Facebook. Both Shane and Blake frequent that group every now and then to post pictures of their Halmaheras. And for us here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, there's a new podcast every single day of the week. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your audio content from. And with that said, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you all back here next week.